To make painting the figure easier, I've broken it down into these sub-assemblies. Note that I have one arm attached to the gun and the other arm attached to the figure for the time being. Everything was primed in black. I'm going to start by focusing on the statue part of the figure. I'm going to use the Statue of Liberty in New York City as my example of materials and construction types. The first color I'll use is Balthasar Gold, and I've thinned this down about 2 parts water, 1 part paint. Don't forget to get the inside of the statue skin also. Now I'm going to use Fulgrite Copper, which is a brighter color. This has only been thinned with maybe 2 parts paint, 1 part water. Now I'm going to dry brush on some Canoptek Alloy, something alloy, and this I'm just going to do on the exterior surfaces, trying to hit mostly the edges. You can see how that looks there. I'm going to be covering this almost entirely in verdigris, so there's not going to be a lot of this showing through. If you were going to be doing it with less verdigris showing and more of the metallics, you might want to switch to a brighter silver for the highlighting, just to help those pop out a little more. I want to switch to a contrast paint called Aeldari Emerald, and I've thinned this really heavily with water. I did that for 2 reasons. One, I just want it to flow much better because by itself it covers really well. But 2, when it flows like this, or when it's thinned down like this, it kind of breaks the pigment apart. And so on the surface, it's going to be a little more patchy, but it'll settle into those recesses, give a little definition, and just start selling that verdigris effect. I'm going to deepen the recesses with a shade of Coelia Greenshade. To continue the verdigris effect, I'm going to use some Sotek Green, and I've thinned it down about 50-50 with water, maybe just a little more water than that. And what I'm going to do is all of these areas of major damage, I'm going to go and stipple that in and get it around it a little bit like that. I'm also going to do back into the crevices, like up in here. Just going to let that flow into that. And then also along all the edges of where the material is broken, like this. I'm going to put that out. And I'll also just stipple some on right like that in a few areas just to add to the effect. Now the next paint I'm going to use is Sybarite Green, and I've thinned this one down about the same, maybe a little more water than paint, just a little bit. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into those areas that I've already put that darker green, and I'm going to just kind of stipple that on, and it'll dry fairly translucent. What I can do is then go and evaluate. Do I want to add some more in? Do I want to leave it like it is? And if I get any outside of the previous color, I'm not going to worry too much about that, because this type of effect can develop over years. So there can be a lot of different variations of it. Now I'm going to use some Gauss Blaster Green. Now this is a very intense color. So I've thinned it down even more with water, probably 2 parts water, 1 part paint. I'm just going to stipple this in, and here I'm going to generally keep within the areas that I've already painted. And on some areas I'm going to be a little more deliberate in using it as a highlight. For example, along these edges up here that are broken, here I'm going to focus it on where there's a sharp angle, a transition to another angle. Now I'm going to use a technical paint called Nilic Oxide, and I'm going to glaze this on. And what I've done is I've thinned it 1 part of the paint, 5 parts Lamy and medium. I wanted to preserve the structure of the pigment, so that's why I didn't use water as I've done on the other paints. And on this, I'm not going to treat it as a wash, but but rather I'm going to just glaze on very, very thin layers. You can see that it's just barely got any color to it. But I'm going to glaze on thin layers, and then I'm going to dry them with a hairdryer, and then I'm going to evaluate it and glaze on more layers until I get it like I want. You can see here how it looks to add those glazed layers of the nylon oxide. And I just kept building it up and building it up until I got, like I said, I'm going for kind of a Statue of Liberty kind of look there in New York City. You can still see the underlying colors. You can still see the underlying work, but it's certainly toned down and blended in. And if you're looking at this and thinking, yeah, you just covered up all the work you did, this is the first time I've done verdigris. And part of my goal in doing all of this, and I try to do this on every build, is just experiment with something new, to try something new, and to do as many techniques as I can possibly get away with on one project, just to see, okay, how does this look? Because at any point in this process, I could have stopped and said that is sufficient. Before I added this nylon oxide, I could have just stopped there. I could have added none of it. I could have added a little of it. I could have added as much as I have. I could have added more. But it let me see how that looks. So the next time I need to do a verdigris effect on any project that I'm doing, I'll have a better understanding of how all of the different products that I'm using work and how they interact and what the results are going to look like. So to me, building and painting is always a little bit of an experiment in progress. Now, glazing that much of the nylon oxide on did tend to flatten it out a bit. So I'm going to go back in with a contrast paint, Aethermatic Blue, and I'm going to just start essentially doing a recess shade again, just to bring out the details a little more, bring out some of the recesses and the shadows, just deepen them a little bit, and reestablish the volumes, I guess, to sound really artsy-fartsy. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this same Aethermatic Blue, however you say it, and I'm going to get some on my brush, but I wicked off most of it onto this paper towel here. What I'm going to do is just start in these shadowed areas. Just start glazing that on underneath, just to help bring out the shadows. But I'll just do this on any of the undersurfaces like that. I can do it along this lower edge right here. I can do it like along the lower edge of the upper lip, the lower edge of the nose, the lower edge of the eyelid, up in here. Just anywhere you want shadow, you can go in and glaze that in. Now, just as I wanted to deepen the shadows, I'm going to use some Gauss Blaster Green, thinned with water and Lamian medium, and I thin them down to a glaze consistency. And all I'm going to do is just go in and pick select areas where I want to just do some brightening up, bringing up edges, things like that. I'm done with the verdigris for now. What I'm going to do, I'm going to start painting in these metal support strips. Now, looking at the Statue of Liberty, it has a metal framework inside that all of the copper and other materials are bolted onto. So I'm going to follow suit here and imagine that these are going to be heavily rusted. So I'm going to start off by painting all of the internal structure with typhus corrosion as a base. That'll give it just a little bit of texture, just for some visual interest. And I have to make sure that I get all the internals, because there's framework in there too. So I want to get all of that. I'm going to be very careful not to get it on the verdigris that I've already done. I'm also going to paint this stand that Operative Umbral-six is standing on, and get all of that painted in the typhus corrosion. I apologize for the poor audio quality of that last segment. My mic fell off and I didn't realize it. Next, I'm going to stipple on some very thin Doombull Brown all over that I've just painted with the Typhus Corrosion. Don't forget to do all the framework over here on the statue too. I'm taking some Skrag Brown and thinned it down with water. Probably 1 part water, 1 part paint, maybe a little heavier on the water. You can see here, it's thin, but not super thin. I'm just going to stipple that on over the previous colors. I'm going to switch to Squid Orange. And again, this is heavily thinned, even more so than the previous paint. Now I'll use Tau Light Ocre and stipple that in. Again, the paint is very thin. Now I'm going to use a shade, Fuegan Orange, Fuegan, however you say it. And I'm just using this straight out of the pot, neat as they say. I'm just going to go over everything like that. It's still drying, but you can see how that looks. I guess that looks kind of like a rusty object. You can see here how those look, front and back. I was a little more deliberate about using the lighter colors on the front because that's going to be more prominent, and I wanted that to be just a little more in the forefront. I repainted this halo in flat black. Doesn't matter which brand, just something consistent so that what's going to go next will have a good base. And now I'm going to go over that with Retributor Armor, or Retributor Armor, or maybe it's Retributor Armor. But whatever it is, it's gold, and I've thinned it down quite heavily with water. I'm going to give that gold a good coat of Reikland Flesh Shade. That'll give it a bit of an aged look, add some shadowing, things like that. Once the wash is dry, I'm going to use some Auric Armor Gold to do a few things. One, I'm just going to go in and do just an edge highlight around any of the edges that are upturned and would receive light. I'll also put a little touch of paint on each of these rivet heads. Once I have that edged, I want to go in with some little more paint on my brush and just do kind of a dry brush motion. Now I'm going to use some Stormhost Silver to just stipple on a few little areas that are going to make it appear more damaged, scratchy, that kind of thing. All that glitters is not actually gold. So in these most damaged areas, I'm going to paint in some Eshin Gray, and then just within those little areas of Stormhost Silver that I put in earlier, I'm just going to add a little bit of essentially chipping, just like that. Now, as I did with the gold parts, I did a black reset, I guess you would say, on the figure, and I just used Abadon Black for that. But again, when you're doing kind of a color reset, anything dark, black, dark blue, dark green, anything like that, any brand, just giving it full coverage so that you're starting from a consistent base will work well. Now the box art shows the figure in, essentially black, but I want to do something just mildly different. I want it to be just a little lighter to try and show off some of the sculpt. This is such a nice sculpt. I want to show off a little more of that. So I'm going to start painting it in a 50-50 mix of Abadon Black and Incubi Darkness. Now I'm going to begin the process that I, in my mind, think of as the point at which I mess up the model. I'm going to start painting in the highlights, and I'm going to be very careful about it because because I want to build them up slowly. So I'm using some very light stippling motions. And right now this is just Incubi Darkness right out of the bottle. And I'm going to paint this on most of the surfaces except for things that are in very definite shadow. Now I'll continue adding highlights. This is a 50-50 mix of Dark Reaper and Incubi Darkness. And it's thinned down very heavily. You can see just how thin that is. Now I'll switch to Dark Reaper, just right out of the bottle, but thinned again very heavily with water. This is a 50-50 mix of Dark Reaper and Thunderhawk Blue. Now I'll go to just Thunderhawk Blue, again heavily thinned, just stippled on to give some of the very highest highlights. Alright, here he is dry fitted together. You can kind of see where that's going, where that's gone. It's not the worst I've ever done. I'm going to base all of the leather parts in Gorthor Brown. Now I know that's a little light, but stick with me. I'm going to use Steel Legion Drab and just do a chunky highlight around all of the edges. I'm also going to go in and just stipple on some dots and streaks of the Steel Legion Drab just to provide a little bit of texture on the leather. Now I use Karak Stone to do a fine edge highlight on all those leather parts. Just like that, all around. And I'll also use this to just kind of add some more of that stippling in. Just to add in little bits of texture here and there. Now I use a contrast paint, Gore-Grunta Fur. And I will just paint this over all the leather details. It's going to darken it down. It's going to blend everything together, give it a much more deep leather look. It's also going to give me some shading. Alright, that's still drying a little bit, but I can live with that. That'll work. Now on the pack and some of the helmet parts, I'm going to do a first highlight of Eshin Gray. I'm going to do a finer edge highlight of Dawnstone. I decided I'm going to leave the face mask in black, so I'd gone in and added some Eshin Gray details. And now I'm going to just highlight some of those areas with the Dawnstone. I'm imagining the knife scabbard is kind of a composite material, and I think a green color would work good. It's a good tactical color. So I'm going to base this first in Nocturne Green. I'm also going to paint this part of the gun in the Nocturne Green. Now I want to invoke kind of a feel of night vision goggles for the lenses. Now I know night vision goggles don't glow, but in order to kind of suggest that to the brain, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with some Phalanx Yellow and base the eye lenses in that. Now I'm going to add in a Citadel Contrast paint called Striking Scorpion Green. And I'm going to flip the figure over and take advantage of gravity. And along the top of his eye lenses, I'm going to put in some Coelia Greenshade. Just right there along the top, into that corner. Down along there. Just to add a little more contrast and depth up towards the top. On the scabbard, I'll do the first highlight using Flesh. I'll use the same color on the green part of the gun. Now I'll attempt a fine edge highlight with Death Guard Green, and I'll do the same on the gun. I'll paint the skull on the knife with Lead Belcher, and also those little pommel parts that I'll have to paint off camera just so I can see what I'm doing. The wrappings on the knife handle will be in Screamer Pink. If you're a Special Operations troop, you're supposed to be tactical, hidden, but you're also showing bravado. So I'm going to paint this sash in Mephiston red. I did some highlights off camera in Wild Rider red. I couldn't film it. I had to get it right up to my face to do it. So just some quick highlights though. Now I'm going to go over everything: the skull, the handle, and the sash with Seraphim Sepia wash. On the gun, I'm going to do some edge highlighting with Eshin Gray. And I'm also going to use Eshin Gray to just paint in some of these details along the gun. Now I use Dawnstone to do a fine edge highlight. I'm just going to put in a few spot highlights here and there with Gray Sear like this. Well, I think that'll do it. I can live with that. It's not quite what I envisioned in my head when I started. I could probably spend a little more time doing some more contrast on the verdigris part, but I like it. I like it. It was quite a task to get all of this glued on. In the end, if you're building this model, just be patient, keep working it. I found it easiest to put the gun on the figure, then put this piece on because there's 2 alignment points on it, and then to put this piece on and get it positioned relative to the whole thing. I did use Tamiya extra thin cement, not super glue, because if I would have used super glue, I would have had it positioned wrong and it would have glued in place, and well, I'd have been stuck. So I just worked carefully with regular model glue, but it is a super, super fun kit to paint. I have really enjoyed painting this. Now the kit can be a little bit hard to get. It comes as a premium that you can get with a Warhammer Plus subscription. They have 2 kits, in fact, this one and an Orc. And if you get one, you get that as part of your subscription, and the other one you can buy for a price, but it's only available to Warhammer Plus subscribers. But you can find them for a pretty good price on eBay. And by pretty good, I mean kind of expensive. But it really is just super fun, and I've just really enjoyed the variety of elements on this little vignette are just so cool. I mean, you've got the verdigris and the metallics, and then the rust, and then the figure with its dark suit, and the leather. I mean, there's just a lot of things going on that just really make it a wonderful kit to paint. Well, thanks so much for watching this video. I'm grateful, especially if you're still hanging around. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you've maybe gotten a few ideas from it, or just maybe it, may just say to yourself, "Hey, I want to go paint something." That's the main thing. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and thank you for watching. I'm grateful for that, and certainly thank you to all my Patreon supporters. For the support you give to me and ultimately to my family. We're just very grateful for that, and thank you for that. And with all that being said, I'll leave you with one final thought, as I always like to do. In this hobby, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.